Newark, New Jersey, February 2012. Thousands of people packed into a single church while thousands more stood outside in the cold, unable to get in, unwilling to leave. Grammy-winning singers sat beside childhood friends from the neighborhood. Hollywood actors shared pews with gospel choirs, and when a man nobody had expected to stand at that podium walked forward and gripped the edges of it, the entire room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with instinct, the collective sense that what was about to happen deserved full attention. Kevin Costner had not been her husband. He carried no official title that explained his presence at that pulpit. But when he opened his mouth and started talking about Whitney Houston, every person in that church understood immediately that what they were watching was not a performance of grief. It was the real thing, delivered by someone who had loved her in a way that defied the usual categories, someone who had seen her before she could see herself and had never stopped believing in what he saw. This is that story, told from the beginning, because the beginning matters more than most people realize. The two of them do not arrive together in the mind's first instinct. Costner's world was cinema, westerns, political dramas, the particular brand of quiet American masculinity that won him an Academy Award for Dances with Wolves. Her world was music, specifically the kind that does not merely fill a room but restructures it, a voice so technically exact and emotionally unbounded that recording engineers reportedly struggled to believe what they were capturing was real. Two entirely separate galaxies of entertainment, and yet a single film pulled them into the same orbit and changed both of their lives permanently. That film was The Bodyguard, and its path to the screen was long enough to qualify as its own separate story. The original screenplay had been written years earlier with Diana Ross and Steve McQueen in mind. What happened next was not a quiet rejection. The script got turned down 67 times, which in Hollywood terms is less a number and more a verdict. It faded. It gathered dust. And then Kevin Costner found it. He read the script during a period when few studios were returning his calls about passion projects, and something in it caught him in a way he could not release. He held on to it through the years when holding on to it cost him nothing because he had no leverage to push it forward anyway. And when that leverage finally arrived after Dances with Wolves, he used it immediately. The condition he attached to his involvement was not negotiable. His co-star would be Whitney Houston, not someone comparable, not an alternative with similar appeal, but hers specifically, and nobody else. The hesitation around this choice came from several directions. Houston had never appeared in a film before, which meant attaching her to a high-profile Hollywood production carried real risk regardless of how famous she was. There was also, spoken carefully in industry conversations and rarely stated directly, the question of how 1992 American audiences would receive a black woman in a leading romantic role opposite a white male star. The raised eyebrows and quiet conversations about market readiness were real, and they added friction to every discussion about the casting before a single frame had been shot. What surprised many people, though, was Houston's own resistance. She wanted to expand her career, yes, but she wanted to do it carefully, in smaller steps, in roles that would let her learn the craft without the entire world watching. The Bodyguard was not a small step. She told interviewers she feared people would dismiss her before she had been given a fair chance, that the label of singer-turned-actress would be applied before the performance could speak for itself. What changed her mind was a phone call, not a message passed through representatives, but Costner himself picking up a phone and calling her directly. That gesture landed differently than any official approach could have, and she said yes. Even after agreeing, the studio required a screen test before her casting would be confirmed. That demand carried an implicit message about the industry's confidence in her, and it was not a flattering one. What Costner found when he went to her trailer that day became the emotional center of the eulogy he would deliver years later. She was not managing her nerves with practiced calm. She was genuinely undone, picking herself apart in ways that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with fear. Every reassurance he offered seemed to dissolve before it reached her. He told her she was extraordinary, and she looked back at him like he was speaking a language she had not yet learned. The grief of watching that landed on him hard, and that's when the thought moved through him, the impulse he came very close to acting on. He considered rigging the audition, ensuring by whatever means the situation allowed that the test would go in her favor no matter what actually happened in front of the camera. Any stumble could be reframed as range, as a deliberate choice, as evidence of exactly the kind of depth the role required. He could have done it. None of that mattered because he stopped himself. Arranging the outcome before she had been allowed to discover it herself would have been another person deciding for Whitney Houston what she was capable of. She deserved the chance to succeed or fail on her own terms. So he stepped back, told her he needed to give her a few minutes, and left. 20 minutes later, the screen test stopped 4 minutes after it started. During the time he had been away, Houston had changed into heavier makeup, layering on more than the lighting could support, and under the heat of the studio lamps it began to melt almost immediately. When Costner asked her why she had done it, her answer arrived barely above a whisper. She had only wanted to look her best. She had wanted to be good enough. No ego, no star behavior, just a woman so afraid of falling short that she had tried, in the only way available to her in that moment, to add something more to what she already was. That answer was when Costner saw her completely. Not the celebrity, not the recording artist, not the international icon, but the person underneath. Someone who carried her success as a question rather than an answer. Someone who gave everything and then worried the everything was not enough. Seeing that did not diminish her in his eyes. What it did was make him love her. The Bodyguard opened in November of 1992 and earned close to $500 million worldwide, making it one of the most commercially successful films of that entire year. The soundtrack became one of the best-selling albums in recorded music history, and the reason it worked as well as it did came down entirely to her. Costner stated without qualification in his eulogy that the magic belonged to Houston and that many actors could have played his role. The character he portrayed was a function, a presence in service of the story rather than its actual heart. Rachel Marin was the heart, and that role needed Houston specifically because the combination of her talent, her emotional reality, and the vulnerability she carried without ever seeming to intend it produced something that could not have been assembled from any other components. One of the most enduring moments in the film, the performance of "I Will Always Love You," was not in the original production plan at all. A different song had been selected for that scene, and it was Houston who brought in the Dolly Parton composition and then delivered it in a way that separated it permanently from every version that had existed before. People who grew up after the film are sometimes surprised to learn she did not write it, because her performance claimed it so completely that the song and her voice became inseparable in the public mind. Away from the film set, the connection between them ran through something quieter than Hollywood. Both had grown up in the Baptist church, and that shared experience gave them a language of memory that professional success could not replicate. Sitting together during production, they traded stories about what those early years in the church had actually felt like. Costner described passing notes during sermons, slipping out to the church kitchen after communion, holding glasses and pretending to drink whiskey while conducting one-sided conversations with imaginary companions. Her laughter at these stories, he said, was real and free, the sound of two people finding each other in where they came from rather than where they had ended up. On the 12th of February, when Houston died at the age of 48, Costner's public response came stripped down to almost nothing. "She was my one true love." He appeared later on CNN and described the period when her struggles with drug addiction had become widely known and how helpless he had felt watching someone he cared about that deeply moved toward a darkness he could not reach into. He had written her letters during that time, multiple letters sent across an uncertainty he could not resolve, each one an attempt to communicate that someone was still there, someone would come if she reached out. He admitted he disliked writing. He wrote anyway, repeatedly, because the alternative was accepting that there was nothing to be done. None of those letters were ever answered. Whether she read them remains unknown. What Costner carried forward from that silence was not guilt, because the trying had been real, but grief, the particular weight of having done everything possible and still watched the outcome unfold unchanged. At the pulpit, his final words to her sounded less like a formal eulogy and more like the end of a conversation that had been running for 20 years. "You weren't just good enough," he told her. "You were great. You sang the whole song without a band and made the picture what it was, and a lot of leading men could have stood where he stood, but only she could have stood where she stood." The bar she set sat so high that her own peers in popular music, working professional singers of real ability, did not want to attempt what she had done. "The only ones who still try," he said, "are young girls who dream of someday becoming what she was." And his hope was that those girls would know Whitney would have wanted them to believe in themselves first, before anything else. His closing image placed her in heaven, making even God wonder how something so extraordinary had come to exist. He said his farewell with the same tenderness he had offered her in that trailer decades before, when the makeup was melting and her voice had gone small and she had only wanted to look her best. "Don't worry," he told her. "You'll be good enough." And then Kevin Costner stepped back from the podium, and the church held the kind of silence that follows something true.